So I'm going to be using some 10 by 10 canvases. One of the most difficult things to do, I believe, is to paint abstracts. It is void of being able to teach because I feel that abstract comes from an emotional center of the artist, and I paint abstracts to express things I don't have words for. Um, but as far as technical wise, I always start with the same thing I start any painting with is my dark colors first. I like odd numbers. I start with threes, and then I move color. I add color based off an emotional response to color, as silly as that might sound. I don't know how to explain what an emotional response to color is outside of putting color together that feels good. I can talk you through my thought process as I'm doing it, but it isn't like, let me teach you how to paint abstracts, because I don't think I'm the best person to really dive in to the anatomy of an abstract. I am basically going with what I know. I put one dark color down, I put the next value next to it. I kind of work a shape around a canvas. I put color down in very simple ways. I like simple shapes. Um, I like the randomness of those shapes, but really, I am mapping here. I am mapping in what color belongs where. And as I continue to map across a piece, I then will get to a refinement stage that I like to use my catalyst wedge and add texture. So abstracts for me are not just putting color down, they're also adding texture. And then I change my tool accordingly. So again, the same thing, it's literally a value scale going down in 3 sections. The purpose of an abstract is to move the artist around the piece, direct them, have resting areas, have energy areas, and that's what I'm creating here. But I'm doing it really by just using value. The other really cool part of this is when you make, let's say you were doing a floral series, then what do you do with the leftover paint? That's usually where I use my abstracts, my abstract or my painting for abstracts. I don't always go to abstract as my first choice, but it's kind of like a challenge. What can I do with the remaining color left in my palette? What does it move me to do? So if I can encourage you to kind of go to abstracts from a place of almost like meditation. And I know that that's probably sounding weird too, but it should be without judgment. It should just be an emotional response to what you're feeling through color. Now, the second thing I have here is I go, okay, I started with green. What color am I going to put next? It just felt like yellow and green, felt good. Could have put teal, but I feel like teal is better placed on the blue, and I don't know why. Again, emotional response, right? I have no justification for where this paint is going. I'm just moving around the piece where it feels good. I figure I'll touch that one with the yellow since my brush is dirty. And again, this is just a map. It's a road map that I'm going to edit back as I decide where this piece is going to end up. And probably no truer a word like map is valid, but then when I'm talking about abstracts. I still go in with the same thing. I'm going to use value scale, pick up the next lightest, just keep layering it in there. A lot of times people want to see things in abstracts, and I think sometimes once somebody does say, oh, it looks like a rhinoceros, I then can't stop seeing that. So I try to stay away from making shapes that are too shapely, if that makes sense. A lot of times my abstracts look like maps, topography, and I like that. I feel like it is a journey. I feel like that's what they represent. And I think intuitively, the abstracts, when I create them, they are kind of like roadmaps or documents, topography of the hills and the valleys that I'm currently in. So again, this is just mapping in color, moving in, or how much color can I put in here before it's getting offensive. And then as I do that, you'll see me start committing to placement. I'm putting this dark blue in hopes to make a darker area. You can see me just thinking. This is in real time. So I'm just kind of thinking about, what am I doing? I'm actually not, and hadn't realized until just this point that I kind of connected those marks across the two canvases. And I know that sounds silly, but it wasn't until just now that I saw that. I just love that teal on the blue. You'll see me kind of move things around typically to create visual triangles. At least I try to do that, to create areas that force the eye from one side of the canvas to the other. And if I don't do that, if I keep it in one area, then I usually have an odd number of marks. So like, for instance, on the green painting, you'll see I've got 5 dark blue marks. And then using the teal, I've kind of moved it across the piece so that there is some kind of visual triangle reason to move your eye across the piece. Working still with value, just layering that in. I use that as a map again. I guess the hardest part is deciding where to first put the color. And then once I have the color there, it seems like it's much easier to know where to put the rest of the color. I've also done a series of paintings where I used Prussian blue as the first color, and it's a really deep, rich blue. And I felt like they were holes, like spaces to fall into. And I think I like that concept and these dark areas, even though I'm not consciously making them holes. It's like there will end up being more light than there is dark. And the first paintings I did in that series, there was more dark than light. And it was a very spot on characterization of where I was. So I think that that's interesting in moving through your own creative process. All right, so this is what I was talking about, changing the tool. I've got something down there. Now, how do I want to amplify things? And I use that word amplify to explain texture, but also to create the thickness. How do I commit? How do I make this orange more orange, or say orange bolder? I'll play with amounts of paint, size of paint. I'll even play with the directionality of that catalyst wedge. And I showed you when I picked up that paint, I have a lot of paint. This is way more than a brush would pick up with this wedge. And it releases more. I'm very subtly, like I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure. So think about icing, putting icing on a warm cake. You have to really just glaze over the top of it. And that's, I would say, a good analogy for how much pressure I'm putting on here. And you could see how much bolder the darks are getting. I'm amplifying the dark area. I'm amplifying the light area by just committing to a thicker amount, which is making it darker or lighter in this case. I'm trying to vary the sizes. And there you go. I'll vary the direction. I will say I'm a creature of habit. The other thing I could point out, but I'm not doing it here, which I probably should have, is on a square canvas, it's a lot easier to not get married by orientation. But I do like this vertical orientation so much, and I use it a lot in my work. So I guess it's an old habit dies hard. Putting the pink in there now. I did not originally have pink, so I'm using it as an accent, but I'm putting it on the yellow more so than the green. It's again that roadmap. Where will this look best at this point? Doesn't mean it's going to stay there, but that's how I'm figuring out where to put color. Notice I did put that pink to the right to create that triangle, but I didn't really put it over the center of the green, if that makes sense. I put it towards the edge. Red is the color that the eye sees first. So whenever you input red, or in this case pink, it's going to draw the eye. Accentuating those dark areas again. And as I'm talking you through this, know that it really isn't a conscious thing that I'm doing. If you weren't watching this, I wouldn't be explaining it. I would just be feeling it. Oh God, that sounds so weird. You just got to feel it. That's not explanatory. But using that first mapping layer is the best way to explain it for me. In subtle little touches, I'm loading up that wedge and putting color down. And I don't like it when they get those like blends there. So I'll probably go back and thicken it much lighter and touch it just a little bit. I'm like, I'm done with that one. Let me move this one over there. You can overwork an abstract to death. I try to keep, I think abstract for me is a quick release. And so I don't want to, it's like a first impression. I don't want to go back and kind of second guess it. So again, this is what I call amplifying. I'm finding that area that's similar in color and amplifying it, making it thicker, bolder. Going back over those areas. And it does change. The painting takes on a personality, a life, I think, as you're going through it. It'll either feel good or feel bad as you're working through. I've heard this statistic that it takes like every 12th painting, you have to do 12 bad paintings before you can do one good one. Although in the end, I love these, by the way. I'm so drawn into color. I'm consciously trying to add pops of color in my art because it's like a happy place. I also love resting places, so I love that white. So, or non-busy is another way to express white space. The term white space is given to resting area. Doesn't have to be white. In this case, I'll use the lightest of the blue and the lightest of the pink to create that white space in here. I'm really trying hard to work that teal in there. And I am trying to use the full extent of the palette. In my mind, I'm saying I've got a lot of extra paint. What should I do with it? I don't want to throw it away. I don't want to do 400 journal pages, which is what that would probably equate to in my palette. So abstract being this thick use of paint, this heavy texturizing with this catalyst wedge is a really great solution for me. You might not feel comfortable with this tool. When I teach, people always want to know how I make the art, so I show this tool, but this might not be your natural jump into tools. I've had students say they've used spatulas. They make a smaller set of these tools. They used key cards. There's a palette knives. So there's a million ways to do what I'm doing with a different tool. And I've been doing this for a while, so if it's not coming as easily, then just know that it might take some practice. And just abstract itself might take some practice. I went through a pretty long phase, I want to say, of doing something like this. I almost had this negative self-talk of saying, well, that can't be art. All I did was put color down. And it wasn't until I actually went through some trauma that I understood abstract. And that sounds weird, but it really was I didn't have words for what I was feeling, and color was the language that I was able to speak when I couldn't express. And then there's just like feeling trapped, and the freedom that abstract gave me, I call a voice. And so if this is something that you're struggling with in appreciating your own mark making, it could just be that you maybe are coming to it with less emotion than maybe you need. Be interesting, get really mad and paint an abstract painting and see what happens. Which I believe I've seen, like de Kooning. I feel like he was angry. And the marks I make, I am now more appreciative too. I think it doesn't have to be a pony every time you go to a painting. It could just be pixelated marks. And it's funny, I talk about pixelating my paintings, and then when I go to abstract, I paint these pixelated abstracts. So it's probably not so far-fetched that that's what happens when I paint an abstract. This is that lightest blue. I don't want to deter from that, but this is that lightest blue, and this is where I'll edit. So The painting up until I put the background on is painting from the inside out. Once I get to the background, I call that painting from the outside in. I'm going to shape, I'm going to edit. I love using textural, thick amounts of paint during this part. I a lot of times don't like the eye falling off the canvas. So something where that yellow is, I kind of leave it and then I'm like, it doesn't make me feel as comfortable. So I leave it hoping I can keep it and then I end up covering it up. But the eye falling off the piece isn't necessarily my happy place. So I'll work around that. I'm also conscious of not making like a straight line. So I want the bottom to have a shorter part and a longer part, and that little bit down there is interesting to me. And I almost have to step away from the painting to kind of take it in as a whole as I'm working through it as well. This is really like icing a cake, and it really is a joy for me. You'll see me kind of manipulating the tool to working curves. Sometimes I don't like that spooge where they mix. I won't take away all of it, but I don't like it when it's so distinctive. You see me kind of trying to leave that yellow there. And that's frame enough just to get that like that for me. I don't know why, it's a thing. I'm separating bits out. I do this with my florals where if I have a whole bunch of clustered florals, I'll separate some flowers so that they're not touching. I like the air, and I think that's what it represents for me, that there is air, there is freedom. And so I like everything touching as I'm putting it on there and then being able to edit out what I want to be separate. Like painting my own personal Panama Canal through it. I'm using really the edge, the full edge of that brush in the larger areas. And then when I was painting those marks of color in the middle, I was using that corner. And that's just how I've learned to wield the tool. I have painted 6-foot paintings with nothing but this tool, no brush whatsoever. The O series paintings were only painted with this tool, no brushes. So I have been using this tool longer than probably most of you, and I've learned a way to wield it. But again, want to say that if you are struggling with using this tool, this is not a lesson in telling you have to. This is a lesson in showing you how I will interpret color in an abstract, a purely abstract form, while keeping the pops. I mean, this one is predominantly that what I was calling that neutral, but there is a depth, there's a dark, using value to really accentuate color, neutral tones, and balancing the contrast between the two. You see me just figuring out what am I going to do from there. I don't like the color going off the thing, so you'll see me kind of get up there to that turquoise spot and kind of frame it in a little bit. The empty area is restful to me, and I feel like it is the literal contrast of the pops of color. This is, again, editing, trying to figure out where I want to go, and how to get the tool to go there is another thing too. You'll find if you're using this the first time, you have to constantly keep kind of wiping off the wedge if it's getting gunky. I usually have a paper towel in my left hand where I'm just wiping off the paint. Could seem wasteful because there might be viable paint on the edge of it, but it's just not serving my purpose at the time. And see, I'm going to frame that in because I'm like, I just can't have you falling off. One of those little quirks. Okay, several quirks I have, but that's one of them. So stepping back, kind of taking it in. What do I like? What do I not like? Remember that this is the first layer on the background that I've done. So that refinement really hasn't happened until this point. I've got the background, I've got the foreground. How do I want this to play with each other? How do I want the interaction to read? And that's what I'm doing now. I'm amplifying areas. And like I said, I use that term probably pretty loosely, but it's just popping those out of color, committing, making them bolder. I do love to use value. So I'll put the darker green, the middle green, the lighter green on an area. I like to use the full extent of a color. I'm liking the way this yellow, and it's probably because the purple-ish blue there, yellow and purple are complements. They make each other look better. They bring out the best in each other. So, um, not that I think I was thinking I need to have yellow because I have purple, but it does make sense why I'm going with it. Using that pink now as a map. Again, changing the shapes of those. This is all quite intuitive. It's just what feels good, taking risks. I do feel like it looks like a donkey. Is it just me? I didn't see that before. See, I hate when I see something in my work. I can't unsee it in my work. I'm going to label this one Jackass. But I love it. I still love it. And so I'm using that wipeout tool right there to carve my name. So you can actually probably read it, but when you get up close to it, you can see that my name is carved into the thick layer of paint. Especially with abstracts, I never want my signature to be a part of the design. I am done working on Jackass. And so here's what I'm thinking in my head now. What am I going to do with this? And the answer is, okay, go with what you know. Let's go ahead and figure out what I'm going to go around and edit some of the things that are kind of playing with my visualization of the whole thing. I'm using that lightest pink in this case. I feel like it's that throwback to the 80s, that preppy pink and green. I'll just work my way around. I don't like things touching the edge or falling off typically. One of these times I'm going to have to challenge myself to keep something off the edge. So this editing process is just intuitive. What feels good? What don't I like? What doesn't serve me in this right now? And if there's a part I don't like, that's when I go in and I just get rid of it. I wanted to bring that color towards the center. I didn't want it to just be on the outside, so I thought, let me just touch that in there. Again, it's the editing process. What don't I like? What do I like? What doesn't serve me? Any given day, this painting would be totally different. I swear, you come to an abstract painting, you almost, I think, have to paint an abstract painting in a sitting because I will feel differently about it and want to paint a whole different painting. That was not serving me well. So I took it out. It was very rectangular across the center of the canvas. So part of the reasoning to get rid of it is because I just didn't like the shape. It didn't have enough movement, really. It was very static. Using that edge, you know, even though I love using this tool, sometimes it makes it difficult to go around a small piece, but I find that challenge fun. You can see me, and this is in real time, so you can see me kind of deliberating as I'm going around. I'm conscious about not making it a rectangle again as well, so I'm trying to make sure I just don't cut it straight across. You see me turning the canvas. This gives me a better perspective. I think this canvas actually goes through, like, I think the other one, I knew the orientation or didn't change the orientation. This one kind of takes a new orientation each time I twist it. Getting rid of some of the smooge. Sometimes I like a little bit of smooge where the two colors blend, and sometimes it just feels like noise. I like that little curvy thing I got in there. See, I'm wiping that off because I got a whole bunch of wet paint on it. This paint is still wet, so know that if you're doing this and you're getting a whole bunch of mud, it's because you're painting wet on wet, which is, the way I love to paint. But if this is the first time you're painting wet on wet, it would not surprise me at all if you're getting frustrated. Again, the editing process is taking this to a totally different shape. I want to make sure that I'm keeping that in mind as I work around the piece too. So this is not the refinement stage. This is still the mapping. This is the first layer on the background. So certainly I will go back on top of this and make things sit better with me. I'll amplify some areas. Right now, very little is amplified, and it's a lot of the background color still. Using that edge, putting it a little darker. I put that pink in the center, and I didn't want it to just be light pink and nothing that kind of held it there. And by putting a little bit more value in there, it seems to make a little bit more sense as to why the pink is moving across the background. And those pops of pink are it for me. Like, those are the it. Can't have that edge. Again, now I'm really using that pink to navigate, and now I'm going to use that orange to amplify. I'm looking at, where did I get that color from? And so again, this refinement layer, it's how do I make this more popping? And you can see kind of how some areas sit flat if you don't have that texturizing in it. Yes. Tell me that doesn't make it. I try to make that everything has relationship. Like when I put the blue down or pink, it sits next to another value of itself. Again, moving that blue around the piece. Where do I go? Where do I go? Where do I want this? I don't know. And you can see like making some marks bigger. I get a bad habit of making things the same size, so I have to be very aware of that, especially with this tool, because um, I do have the ability to make things different sizes and using the different angles and picking up more paint when I'm placing it down. Again, just amplifying. So as I finish this up, really it's just putting those little pops of color, things that just make it feel settled at the end. And that's why I say abstracts are probably the hardest thing to teach. I think it's just I've seen abstracts that are so minimal that I'm in love with, and then when I go to do them, I feel like, oh, I just crapped out, like I didn't finish it. So I think there's a little bit of an acceptance too when you do an abstract, just like emotion. So when you go to do these and you're using your paint, don't be too hard on yourself. Just kind of let it happen and play around with it. You don't have to use thick amounts like I do. You can go in it from a really simplistic. You can even use the smalls and do a series of abstracts and really kind of practice your hand at mark making and what marks would effectively communicate what you feel and how an abstract would represent you. So I'm just going to take a second here and sign and carve in my name in this one, but abstracts, Donna Downey style. And I hope you love playing with the paint in an abstract style. And if you're not an abstract artist, I hope you kind of take the risk and just test your hand at it.